Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of On the Rocks by Prospector. Today, we're excited to welcome Ewan Downie, the CEO of I-80 Gold. In his extensive 25-plus year career in the mining industry, Ewan has participated in several gold and base metal discoveries and has been awarded accolades to reflect this success, including the 2003 recipient of the PDAC Bill Dennis Prospector of the Year Award and several exploration and development acknowledgments from the Northwestern Ontario Prospectors Association. In this episode, we dig into the value that Nevada offers for mining and exploration companies, as well as investors, and we look at the importance of a domestic supply of critical minerals and gold. Grab your glass of Ewan's Chardonnay from Alris Vineyards, or a Red Bull if it's that time of day, as it was for me, and let's dive in. Ewan, I'm so excited to finally have you on the rocks here today. Welcome online, and we're excited to have you talk about what you've been up to. And I wanted to open it up by asking, what are you drinking today?
Today I'm drinking a Chardonnay. It's a Chardonnay from California, and it's actually a vineyard or a winery that my wife and I own. So it's called Alris Vineyards. It's a little kind of hobby company we have that makes wine in Napa, and we have we had a vineyard on the side of the mountain on Mount George.
Very cool. Wow, I am not that original at all today because we're taping this kind of in the afternoon my time. I'm drinking Red Bull. It's been one of those weeks, so I'm jealous of what you're drinking. And tell me a little bit more about your hobby wine vineyard.
We were at one point planning to move to California. It's still in the cards in the future, but I've been working in the mining industry a little longer than I expected. So we purchased a small vineyard property and winery in Napa Valley. And then I continued to work longer than I expected. And a couple of years ago, we actually sold the property. So we still have our wine, but we don't have the vineyard property anymore.
So can anybody go buy your wine? Can anybody?
We're almost totally sold out. It's in pretty low quantities, but it's a little, it's called Alris Vineyard. So ALYRIS Vineyards.
Very cool. A while back, there was a group of students at Stanford in the geology program that they did a really cool monthly newsletter on how the geology of different vineyards in California impacted the wines that they produced. I'll have to dig that back up. I don't know if you've seen that, but it was really interesting to read about.
No, I haven't seen that.
Yeah, we'll have to get them on the podcast too. I'm not sure if they're still keeping it up, but it was really interesting. I mean, as a bourbon fan, it's not as as directly related, but it's really cool to think about. So tell me a little bit about what you've been up to lately. You guys are getting some great news and seeing some great results at your company.
Yeah, our company's had a lot of success this year. We're a relatively new company. I-80 has been trading for about a year and a half, or just over a year and a half now, following the takeover of Premier Gold Mines, the predecessor, when we spun out the Nevada gold assets. And we're trading currently near all-time highs. And over the last 18 months, we've achieved a New York Stock Exchange listing. So we now trade in both Toronto and New York. And we've had tremendous exploration success this year, and that continues as we are drilling out some brand new discoveries that we've made. And we're also ramping up our mining at our first underground mining operation. So there's a lot going on in the company, that's for sure.
Yeah, you got that. You're pretty busy. And tell me a little bit about where the projects are. U.S., Canada, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, our head office is in Reno, Nevada, and every one of our projects are located in what's called the Battle Mountain or the Carlin Trend. Those are the two main producing districts for gold in Nevada. And our company has 5 project sites within the Battle Mountain Trend primarily. We have significant processing infrastructure, and we call ourselves a made in the USA story because every single one of our projects is in one single geographic area of Nevada.
And, for our listeners who may not be familiar, or they've probably heard us talk a little bit from episode to episode about different opportunities in Nevada and certainly it's known as a mining state here in the US, but what is it that makes Nevada so attractive for mining investment and exploration in particular? It still seems to be a top destination.
Yeah, it's consistently ranked as one of the top, either the top jurisdiction in the world, or it's consistently in the top three every year when the Fraser Institute releases its study, which rates different places for favorability for mining. And I think it's just the state has a very long history of mining, starting way back in the early 1800s. There are a lot of mining operations in the state, so it is a big generator of tax for the state of Nevada, and
Mhm.
probably part of the reason that Nevada has one of the lowest tax rates in all of the United States. And just the geological environment, the deep seated structures that have resulted in significant fluid flow in the past have deposited significant deposits in gold, silver, zinc, lead, copper. It's truly a remarkable area for mining.
Yeah, and I wonder if you don't, because you're certainly a well awarded prospector in throughout your career. And for our listeners that maybe aren't so familiar with the geology side of that, could you dive a little bit deeper into what that means and what it means for your projects?
Well, the as they're called, these the Carlin and the Battle Mountain Trend, they're really believed to be these big, strong structures that run sort of in a northerly, northwesterly direction through the north central Nevada. They're in the Great Basin, as it's called. And these structures and the faults that occur proximal to these areas have been just blessed with their ability to bring gold to surface.
Hmm.
Newmont and Barrick consolidated their Nevada operations into a joint venture company called Nevada Gold Mines. And if Nevada Gold Mines was a company, like a separate company, it would actually be the fourth largest gold producer in the world. So the only larger companies in terms of annual gold production than Nevada Gold Mines in Nevada would be its two owners, Newmont and Barrick, and Agnico Eagle. So it's just an area that's geologically has just produced so many deposits, and there continues to be new discoveries made throughout the state, and we've actually made three new discoveries in the last 18 months in the state. So it really is a prolific area for minerals, and not only that, the government is very favorable towards mining.
And what would you say to folks that might ask, in a state that has been mining for so long and has such big players there already producing, like how is it possible that you don't already know where everything is, right? How do you still have new discoveries in a place like that is so well known?
Our new discoveries have been made immediately adjacent to existing or historic mines. So, a tried and true saying, in my opinion, in the mining industry, is the best place to look for a new ore body is in the shadow of a head frame. So,
Mm.
close to an existing or a historic mine is often the best place to discover new deposits. And that's been true for us here in Nevada. At our Granite Creek project, we discovered what we called the South Pacific Zone immediately north of the underground workings. And it looks like it's going to become the biggest deposit in that mine when we finish drilling it out. It's completely open for expansion. It's extremely high grade for a gold deposit. And that South Pacific Zone has been one of the highlights for us. The other discoveries we've made are, again, we acquired what's called the Ruby Hill property. And Ruby Hill was mined by Homestake, then Barrick, and they had an open pit mine. And around that open pit mine, they discovered polymetallic mineralization and base metals. So polymetallics are lead, zinc, silver, gold rich zones, and also zinc rich zones immediately surrounding the pit. But because Barrick was, I guess at the time considered just gold,
Yeah.
they largely ignored the base metal potential. And we've just started our exploration there. And our Hilltop discovery we announced about a month ago is quite possibly the highest grade new discovery you'll find anywhere in the world in the last several years. So it's pretty exciting for us. That's why our share price has really performed well lately. But it's just early days. We've only announced the first few holes, and we're drilling that discovery area very, very hard. We're putting a lot of effort into it. A lot of drilling is going on there, and we expect it to turn into one of the premier new deposits in the state of Nevada.
No, I think just to dig into that a little bit, I think that's one thing that folks maybe don't understand about mining exploration is that you don't go and find everything there is in one area all at once, right? And kind of for folks that are new to the sector, it's really common for once you find something, you're going to invest your money in drilling out and further defining what it is that you've found. So it really is normal to then have another discovery happen just next door a few years later, or maybe under different priorities, right? Because depending on the mineral that you're looking for, there might be something of interest, but if it's not what you're looking for and what your business plan is focused on, you're not going to go put money into it. And I think that's where maybe folks don't understand that. And it's a little different than like oil and gas, as an example, where you're doing just massive areas looking for everything that you can possibly find.
Yeah, definitely. Typically when you find these large seated structures, like at the Ruby Hill property, we have two different fault structures called the Holly Fault and the Jackson Fault, and those two seem to have brought up mineralization, different types of mineralization. The Holly Fault seems to have been a local area where gold fluids flowed. So proximal to that fault, you find gold deposits, and then you go just a bit further east, and there's this what's called the Jackson Fault system, and now what we call the East Archimedes. And with those two structures, which are immediately parallel, you find more base metals, or in sometimes base metals with a lot of gold. We just announced an extremely high grade gold hit, but also had significant silver and lead and zinc. So it's really an opportunity where you can get diversification in metals. But Barrick, who were mining the open pit at the time when the operation was in production, it was an open pit gold mine. So base metals, underground base metals, and even the underground gold deposit that we've been drilling out there called Ruby Deeps were largely ignored back when they were mining. So that was about 15, 20 years ago. And then since then, the property's been mostly idle till we showed up and renewed exploration and immediately started having tremendous success.
Oh, that's really exciting. It reminds me of like a really extreme example when I was running the exploration program in Afghanistan. The first thing we did was look at all the old Soviet data. And, you had these massive like copper and gold projects with phenomenal grades that frankly, the Soviets in the 70s didn't care about. That's not why they were looking for minerals in Afghanistan. They weren't focused on gold, right? So you had projects in any other kind of situation would have been a really high priority of a company that just were kind of put on a shelf and left there, right? And it does matter when folks are looking at older legacy projects or maybe things that have been looked at before. Just because they've been looked at before doesn't mean that they can't be developed and turned into something worth a lot of money, to kind of summarize it.
Certainly, but I'd much rather be looking for gold or base metal mines in Nevada than
Oh
Afghanistan.
yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. No, but just, you take the same data and you put a different interpretation or economic driver or prioritization matrix on top of it. And, you might be interested in it in one scenario, but not another. So what are you looking to do over the next year then with everything that you've been announcing and everything you have planned?
Well, our production at our first underground operation. So our plan over the next 2.5 years is to build 4 new mines in Nevada. So 3 of them are underground operations, and one of them is an open pit. And the first of our underground operations is just ramping up into production. So we expect 2023 to be a pretty good year for us at that operation for production. But we've also started the development of our Cove project, which is a second very high grade underground mine we plan to bring online in the next several years. And Ruby Hill, where we made these new base metal discoveries, we actually have a very large high grade gold deposit there that we are in the process of permitting, and we actually expect to start developing that underground mine sort of mid-year 2023. And so
Mm.
by the end of next year, we expect to have, of the first three underground mines, that they will all be either in production or in development. And so our growth profile over the next several years, I think, is the best in our peer group.
And what do you think it means with this renewed focus on domestic supply chains here in the US and I would say a higher level of support in the US for mining across the board, I think, than certainly there has been in the last decade or so.
Yeah, I think things are changing. It became really popular, I'd say, over the last couple of decades to say we don't want it in our backyard, so push off production elsewhere. And if you look at the biggest two producers and holders of metals and minerals, it's really Russia and China.
Hmm.
And I'd say the US is not, they're not the best friends of the US these days. So the relationships were good. It was people were trading metals and minerals freely. It became less of a priority to do it here at home. But we've seen states
Hmm.
like Wisconsin and Maine and a few
Hmm.
others change their laws when it comes to mining to before the Ukraine situation and to promote that they would be open to mining again. And I think if people were better educated on what mining really is today, it's not what it was 40, 50 years ago when people just dumped tailings in a lake. It's
Yeah.
highly regulated, that mining is actually, for the most part, a very clean, condensed operation. If you look at a forestry operation, they, for miles and miles, all the trees are gone when they're finished. Mining, you can try to fit everything in a tiny little area, often secluded away where nobody's going to see it. So I think we're seeing the attitude change, but really with the, I guess, the political situation when it comes to Russia and China of late, I think governments are finally recognizing what a lot of mining companies have been saying forever, that you should do it here at home. Don't do it
Yeah.
elsewhere. We can regulate the environmental controls better here. Whereas in China and Russia, the US buying the metals from there, they have no control over what they do environmentally. So I think it's really important for having domestic supply chains, and what's happening politically in Ukraine and China right now is really starting to open first the politicians' eyes, and hopefully the general public will come around to that as well.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I hope that even just starting to see more discussion of mining and supply chains in the media here in the US in particular. I think, I mean, you're seeing it more and more often, right? Especially with the focus on critical minerals, but or battery metals. But I think we're going to hopefully see that start to kind of trickle down or trickle over into the mining industry in general, where it's talked about and just people are more educated, at least here in the US, on what the companies are doing, why it's important, and why we should want it here, right? And just
Mhm.
basic information to the population about what it looks like and, again, how it impacts everybody's day to day life.
Yeah, the buzzword these days appears to be critical minerals and battery power, but lithium is getting a lot of attention, but the lithium battery actually would go in a car, and the car has significant amounts of copper, zinc,
Hmm.
iron, or steel. So it's not just the battery metals that are needed, it's all metals. And I think
Right.
that's a bit lost in the narrative right now, but truly there's a lot more than just the battery metals that are now listed as critical. Zinc has been recently added in the US as a critical mineral, and most people don't even know what zinc is used for, other than they see it in some
Yeah.
cold medicine. They got, oh, mine's got zinc in it, but it's a very important alloy, or used for in steels to reduce weathering, etc. And really, there's a lot of metals that go into this electrification of the world if it is going to happen.
Yeah, and I always, when I'm talking to folks who aren't familiar with mining and metals, I mean, one that always resonates with folks is copper, and it's like just picture everything that runs off of electricity, stores electricity, any of that. I mean, it all requires copper, and it's one of my favorite lines that Michael Stanley at the World Bank used to use all the time, that there's no such thing as electric bamboo, right? Like you can't,
Yeah.
you still have to move the move the electricity from one place to another, and all of that requires metal.
Yeah, and if everybody, let's say even 50% of the population were driving electric cars, the amount of charging stations we're going to need across North America is going to be crazy how many they're going to have to add. Everybody's going to be adding in their homes. And to charge their cars, you need copper. The wires that feed that electricity from the wherever the plant is, a hydro plant or your nuclear plant or however you're getting
Now
your
fusion,
power.
right? Now
Yeah,
we've cracked the net on fusion. So
yeah.
yeah.
But if you have your windmill farm and to
Mhm.
get that electricity to the customer, it goes through copper wires. So the amount of copper that's going to be needed for this to happen, I think, is so significant that the politicians, like our prime minister here in Canada and President Biden, I don't think they really comprehend how much metals are going
Mhm.
to be needed for this to happen. And when they talk about timelines like 2030, this is going to be done here in Canada, I kind of just chuckle. I say that's impossible. It's never going to happen.
Right.
We're going to have so many more mines to make that much more copper and then put in the infrastructure. We'll be lucky if it happens before 2050. So, but mining is going to be something that we're going to need. It's something that we need today.
Mhm.
Everything around you is being produced from mining. And a lot of the Greenpeacers, so to speak, are um, the environmentalists. They fly to their events in a jet that's run off fuel, and they show up and protest against things. And they drive cars to get around. They take the train, and so they're using the product. They're supporting the product that they're fighting every day. And to me, it's just when it's favorable in the media, that's when it becomes popular.
No, and I always say that a lot of folks tweet their outrage from iPhones made out of everything we mine, right? So,
Yeah,
you know, even Twitter is reliant on the mining industry.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, I wonder, I mean, I certainly, as someone who spends a lot of time thinking about what the industry of the future looks like for mining, whether that be the fun parts, deep sea mining, space mining, all that cool automation stuff, but also just what the future will need in terms of minerals, right? As we look at what the world will look like in 20 to 30 years, what are the different minerals we'll need? I always also come back to we'll always have gold, right? Because I've worked in a lot of emerging and frontier markets, and gold is still the only thing you can carry around the world and buy stuff with. And I really don't see that changing. And it's a really basic level, like, why is gold important? But I think it's an interesting thing to think about where you have all these new crazy minerals that people haven't paid attention to until recently that are now so important. But you also have things like gold and copper that are going to remain important for the next several decades.
yeah, definitely. I think we're seeing kind of a change of the guard when it comes to currencies around the world. We're seeing Russia, given all the issues they've recently gone to, backing their money somewhat. They're talking about
Right.
taking payment for oil and gold.
Mhm.
Gold is the only currency that doesn't have any political influence on it. There's no printing press. You can't just
Yeah.
go print gold like you can money and put debt. So it's got no debt obligation to any government either. So it's definitely a currency. It was the first currency that I think was used in the world. And I often tell people it will be the last currency too.
Yeah, I agree. That's where, I mean, and of course, there's a lot in the news right now about crypto and kind of the collapse of several large crypto exchanges. But I think to me, when people have asked me, oh, why aren't you looking at crypto? I'm like, I look at gold, the original token, right? I mean, it does everything you're looking for essentially, that a crypto token does functionally. And I think it'll continue to do that because the world is not just people connected to computers and internet, right? The world is much, much larger, and everybody globally continues to see that as a great way to exchange value.
Yeah, and like I said, there's no printing press for gold, so what's mined and made into physical is all that's there, and it's in limited supply at different gold prices. More or less becomes economic, and China just had a record quarter of buying gold reserve currencies. So countries are starting to really recognize that there is probably a currency problem, maybe even a bit of a currency war going on here globally, and gold is really the only real money.
Hmm.
If China chooses or Russia chose not to accept US dollars anymore, then US dollars there are technically worthless. And and then when you look at cryptos, I think there's 4,000 and something crypto companies. So that's
Yeah.
hardly rare. And you and I could decide to start our own cryptocurrency tomorrow
Are
and
you
list it,
announcing that on
and
the
we
pod?
could do it.
You're gonna start one? Is that, can we put that
No,
out?
no, it's not a rare currency. So I'll stick with gold.
Yeah. Well, in that vein, for all of our guests this year, we've been asking the same closing question, which is, if you could change one thing about the industry overnight, wave your magic wand, and have the industry change in some way, what would it be?
Well, for me, I think if I could wave my magic wand and change something in industry, it would be the perception of mining, the public's
Mhm.
perception of what we do as an industry. We're often looked down on. It's a dirty industry. I see all the time on Twitter and other places when they talk about, people who are maybe against this movement to battery power showing holes in the ground. But these holes are filled in after, they're always reclaimed. When you look at an old mine site where they left everything there, there's rust everywhere, a head frame, they dump the tailings in the lake. That's illegal today. So
Mhm.
mining is a pretty clean industry. There's a ton of regulations on your emissions, on how you pollute, on how big your footprint can be, and you have to put up money for closure after. So often when you go to an old mine site that was closed down more recently, 5 years later, they look like parks. They're turned into ski hills, small ski hills in town. So it's not as bad of an industry as I think the black eye it was given 50 years ago. So for me, it's, if one thing I could change, it would be the public's perception to what we do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think I was just thinking I would love to go back and look at the answers of all of our guests for the last year, because I think that's been the most common theme throughout our conversations, is like, how does the industry begin to shift and shape a more accurate understanding of who we are, what we do, and why it's important to the world at large, because there is such a disconnect. And unfortunately that results in resistance to the actual work that we want to do. It's has investor impact, right? And just, who's interested in investing in the sector. And it really harms the conversation about what is the world going to need in the next several decades, right? Mining has to be a big part of that conversation, and these big global discussions and roundtable meetings and everything, where everybody's talking about these wonderful objectives. If you don't have people at the table who are the ones that are going to actually produce the metal that's required to do it, then you're missing a huge part of the planning and the vision.
Yeah, for sure. I'm 100% with you on that one. And doing it here at home is important. Like we discussed earlier, it's, you can't always rely on another company to give a country to give you what you need. So
Right.
make it such that it's produced here at home. It creates jobs, creates taxes, and good paying jobs. These are not minimum wage jobs when you work in mining operations. So they're positive for local economies. They're positive for the entire government. Their tax base. It's a very important industry, and really that perception is, as you mentioned too, was a funny story I'll just quickly throw in is, I was one time at my favorite restaurant in New York with my wife, and a lady was sitting at waiting for her table as well at the bar, and we were chit chatting, and as soon as I said I was in mining, it was like I was the Antichrist. And I, she was,
Yeah.
I won't even say some of the things she was saying about me, but I asked her the question. I said, and she was with her fiance, and I said, show me one thing in this restaurant that didn't involve mining to be here. And
Hmm.
she said glasses. And I said, well, quartz, we mine quartz, you melt it down, you make a glass
Yeah.
next. And just finally said it was a wood bar. She said, oh, this made out of wood. That's not mining. I said, why do you think it's nice and flat? Because a steel
Yeah.
blade cut it. I just said next. And by the time they left, her fiance was like, he's right, honey. And then she got on her cell phone to call Uber, to get an Uber to come pick him up. And I said, there's gold in every single cell phone. And as she was walking out, because she was fuming by this time, I said, just every time you use your cell phone, remember me and thank you for supporting my business. That's my
That's right.
last comment. So um, I don't think people really think of what they have and what they do and where it comes from. They just take it for granted.
Yeah. Yeah, I grew up in Maine, and there used to be really funny bumper stickers in Maine because of the resistance and protesting around the lumber industry. And I'm not going to get the line exactly right, but it was like, if you hate the lumber industry so much, give up your toilet paper, you know, like, where do you think that comes from? And I think it's kind of a similar vein that we need to get across.
Yeah, or if you hate lumber and mining, don't own a house, live in a teepee.
There you go. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I'm so glad we finally got together, and look forward to following all the stories about what you're doing and seeing what you do in the next year.
Thank you for having us on. Great chat.
Yeah. All right.